Amon returns some hours later with a case of beer. He shrugs at Zeth's puzzled look.
Seemed like we could all use one.
Amon says as he places the case in the fridge.
Jade most of all.
Zeth says somberly, glancing to her closed bedroom door.
Speaking of,
Amon glances around, searching for her. Zeth puts a finger to his lips, pointing to her room. Amon nods in understanding, before tilting his head to the patio door. Zeth nods, following him outside where they could speak without disturbing Jade. Amon leans his forearms on the railing with a beer in hand as he sparks a cigarette to life. Zeth slowly shuts the sliding glass door before leaning over the rail to join him.
What did you get yourself into, Amon?
He questions quietly.
Seriously, what is this feeling? I mean, you can feel it, can't you?
Zeth lifts a hand to his chest, rubbing at a tightness he couldn't understand. In the dark realm, demons weren't bothered by emotions, but when they traveled to the mortal realm, human emotion was something forced upon them. Zeth lifts his eyes to Amon.
Yeah, I feel it. Despite all the time you've spent in this realm, you've never experienced this emotion.
Amon questions, finally looking Zeth in the eyes, to which Zeth shakes his head in the negative. Amon glares at the can of beer.
I don't know what frustrates me more. The fact that her story makes me feel something I don't understand, or the fact that if I was to comfort her,
Amon clenches his fist around the beer can.
I'd burn her alive.
Amon slowly opens his fist, letting the ashes drift into the air. Zeth flinches at the thought of Jade being burned to ash.
You know the rules, Amon. You can't touch any mortal without harm. There may have been an exception long ago, but that time has long since passed.
Amon lets out a defeated sigh.
I've never cared one way or the other for any mortal, but around Jade, I feel strange.
Amon runs a hand through his hair, clearly irritated.
This would be much easier if she had signed a contract. If she asked me for happiness, I could grant it easily.
Zeth shrugs.
I don't think she's that kind of person. If she wanted something from us, I think she would have said so. She doesn't strike me as the kind of person to hold her tongue.
Zeth lets a small chuckle escape as he passes a sideways glance to Amon.
She sure has no problem scolding you from time to time.
Amon nods slowly as he exhales a puff of smoke.
Yes, she is a bit perplexing. In the past, any association I've had with mortals, they never dare cross me, for they know instinctively that I could crush them easily. Yet, Jade is not only unafraid of me, but somehow in her ridiculous mind, we're friends and thus far she has asked me for nothing.
Zeth crosses his arms and thinks for a moment.
Mortals think all the good shit comes from those snobby angels. I bet she has already tried asking them for help and they ignored her. Why would she expect help from demons?
He scoffs, rolling his eyes.
Well, maybe we should do something about that.
Amon says after a moment of thought, a cold smile spreading over his sharp features. Zeth looks at him with surprise.
What do you have in mind?
Amon spins to lean against the rail, looking toward the apartment with judgmental disgust.
We can start by getting ourselves and Jade out of this shithole.
Zeth eyes him warily, not quite understanding Amon's plan.
Sure, but do you think Jade would make a deal with you for that? Didn't she say this place was all she needed?
Amon passes him a coy smile.
Who said anything about a deal?
Zeth lets his head fall to the side, curiously.
Then how do you plan to do that?
Amon smiles coolly.
The rules prevent us from giving things to mortals, however. There is nothing preventing us from obtaining items in this realm, and if Jade so happens to be hanging around.
His smile widens when understanding flashes in Zeth's eyes.
Oh.
Zeth nods with a smile.
Call Zoe and tell her the plan has changed. Tell her to bring the biggest options she has right away.
Amon demands. Zeth nods as he gets to work summoning Zoe. Using the ash from his own cigarette, he draws a sigil on the pavement of the patio. Amon lends him his demon fire, igniting the sigil in crimson black flames as Zeth chants her name. A ghostly voice chimes out from the air, seemingly carried by the wind. Zeth quickly rambles out a half-explanation to Zoe, providing their location and requesting her to join them quickly. A moment later the flames subside and the ash dissipates. Zeth stands stretching and smiles at Amon. Though the strange uncomfortable feeling was still present, they both felt a little better now, having a way to alleviate it. Inside, Jade finally wakes, confused at first. She sits up in bed and cradles her head. It had been a long time since she'd cried and it had given her a cooler headache. Now that she had slept that off, she rubs the sleep from her eyes, gazing around the dark bedroom. With a sigh she crawls out from her covers, wondering if her earlier conversation had scared the guys away. She exits her room and with a quick glance around the apartment, confirms she is alone again. Jade flicks the kitchen light on and sulks to the fridge. She pulls out a beer and chugs it, uncaring of where it had come from. She leans her back against the counter. The silence, now heavy in the empty space, presses her to the floor as she is overcome with a feeling of defeat. She brings her knees to her chest and rests her head on them, her arms wrapping tightly around herself. Back to being alone, but that was fine, Jade thought to herself. At least this way I cannot be hindered. Unbeknownst to her, the men had come in from the patio when the light came on. They exchanged glances with one another upon seeing Jade curled on the floor. Seth studied her for a moment, tight pain taking over chest again. Had revealing her past really had that much of an impact on her? Unsettled with her depressive state, Seth took a step towards her, wanting to comfort her again, but Amon held his arm out to stop him. Seth looks to Amon with wonder. Amon stares at his hand before looking at Jade. Amon moves forward, silently kneeling in front of her. Knowing he cannot touch her without hurting her causes him great frustration, but he could settle to allow the heat radiating from him to embrace her in a way he could not physically. Amon raises his hands on either side of Jade, letting his warmth embrace her. Jade laughs softly to herself.
I must be going crazy. It feels like he's still here.
She slightly shakes her head, laughing to herself and feeling a little crazy.
That's because I am.
Amon whispers softly, causing Jade to jolt upright, eyes wide with surprise.
Ah, Amon. You're still here?
Seeing Amon before her, with arms wide open as if to embrace her, Jade feels the weight in her heart lift. She flings her arms around Amon without thinking, but is quickly pushed back. Amon is on his feet and backing away from her with a look of fear in his eyes. Seth can only stare in disbelief as Jade looks up at him in confusion. A moment of silence passes before Jade's face scrunches, clearly hurt from being pushed away.
Do you really detest me this much?
Jade falls silent as she glares at Amon. He held out his arms like he was going to hug her, hadn't he? Then why the hell would he push her away? Her brows press with confused anger as she recoils back into a ball on the floor.
If you hate me so much, then just leave. I don't need you. I don't need anyone. You can go. Take your pity with you.
Jade spat out hatefully. It was best to get this over with before any real attachment formed. Seth and Amon exchanged bewildered glances.
Jade?
What?
Jade yells, looking back up with cold hatred.
Did you get burned just now?
Seth points down to her curiously. Amon turns away from her, gripping his chest to stop the tremble in his heart. He had probably made her feel even worse just now, and there was nothing he could do about it. Jade slowly unfurls her brows, and her eyes widen. She holds her arms out to examine them, turning them this way and that before looking back up and shaking her head. Seth pats him on the arm with the back of his hand, forcing him to face Jade once more.
What's going on?
Jade questions, holding out her arms as the men gawk at her in disbelief. Not once had any mortal been able to touch Amon without suffering repercussion. Yet here sat this tiny woman, confused but unharmed. Amon steps closer, kneeling once more to look Jade over.
You're really not harmed?
He questions, staring intently at her arms. Jade tilts her head.
Can you not control who you burn?
She asks him. If that was the case, then she had misunderstood him completely. A smile creeps over her face when Amon shakes his head in the negative. Despite the strangeness of this situation, she felt better. Seth moves forward and offers Jade his hand.
Let's not push our luck, okay?
Jade takes his hand, letting him pull her up.
If you can't control your ability, then how come I didn't get burned this time?
Jade questions as she slowly reaches towards Amon, curiously.
What happens if I touch you again?
She says softly, her scientific mind brimming with curiosity, the question more to herself than directed at anyone else. It was every day she got to examine a demon after all.
Stop.
Amon says in a low tone, halting Jade before she could make contact again. He stares at her in a strange way that makes it hard for her to argue. But just as she was getting the nerve to do so, there was a knock on the door. Amon looks to the door.
Just in time.
He says, vanishing in a mist of black, manifesting at the front door. Jade looks at Seth, feeling even more confused, but he only shrugs before joining Amon at the front door.